Good evening, guys. We are back again, and you might recognize this start line because it's the same one we did on Monday night. So we are doing Zwift Monthly, Race Watopia, and we are back in for the Two Bridges loop. But I thought it'd be interesting if we showed Monday night's race within this race as well, and then you can see and perhaps compare just a few things. Now, let's kick things off with some numbers because I think this is quite cool. I obviously averaged my 20. This is basically a 20-minute race, guys. The race distance is short enough for it to be like bang on that 20-minute mark, or if you're quick, you might just get underneath that 20-minute mark. It's basically 9 miles, which is 14.7k, 160 meters per loop. 160 meters over the whole thing, 80 meters per loop. And there are a few little kind of rolling climbs and then kind of one slightly more major climb on the back end. But as you can see, we've got the two screens. The little one on the right is Monday night's race, and this is Thursday evening's primetime race, again, 6 p.m. in the UK, which I think is 7 p.m. UTC. Let me give some stats to compare the two races. So on Monday night, I averaged 3.6 watts per kg for the race. Tonight, I averaged 3.7 watts per kg. If you saw the Monday night race, I had a bit of a blow up at the end, which meant that obviously my wattage dropped slightly. So all in all, you should be able to start being able to tell by now that Monday night's race was a little bit hotter, so a little bit faster, and that is something that is shown in the numbers. My 15 seconds on Monday night was 6.9 watts, my 30 seconds was 6.2, my 1 minute was 5.3, and my 5 minute was 4.1. Coming to tonight, we go from that 6.9 watts per kg for 15 seconds. That comes all the way down to 5.8 watts. For 30 seconds, we go from 6.2 watts down to 5.8 watts. For the 1 minute, we go from 5.3 watts per kg down to 5.2. For the 5 minutes, we go from 4.1 down to 4 watts per kg. But then obviously the most telling number, which was for the entire race, which was my watts per kg for the entire race on Monday, was 3.6, and it went up to 3.7 tonight because of the calf blow up, the double calf cramp. So I averaged 276 on Monday, and I averaged this time 283. All in all, guys, is a smoother race. Like, it was just a little bit kind of not as aggressive. I will add that I did a warm-up the other day, and I did a warm-up routine, and I think I dropped my FTP estimate. I think you can input your FTP estimate, and I dropped it down to about 285, and I think that's why the power spikes on the bottom of the screen, why you see a lot of red. But all in all, I think one of the comments that kind of I read the other day, so I read all the comments, was that I need to try and be more smooth with my cycling. I agree with you guys, 100%. I agree with you. Perhaps I'm late to react to things, but being more smooth with it stops those little kind of lactate spikes and those aerobic spikes, which obviously are quite telling. These are the little watt spikes you see at the bottom of the screen. Those are the things that zap me, especially. I'm struggling because I had a few people dive in the comments and just say that that we're about the same ability on paper when it comes to like FTP performance, but they are managing to stay with groups whilst I'm being dropped off. So I think some of that has to do with phenotypes and the type of riders that perhaps we both are, and the difference. But also, I think a lot of it comes down to just being I'm quite new relatively to cycling. In the obviously I had almost a year off because I broke my leg, and then coming into cycling, it's this is an entirely new sport for me, so I have to build up the particular muscle strands that are very unique to the cycle stroke. But anyway, let's dive into the race. Tonight's race was actually, I finished this in 20 minutes 42 seconds. Monday night's race I finished in 21:08 due to double calf cramp and blowing up on the climb. But you can kind of see that there are certain points where it's not hugely different in terms of the pace. Monday's definitely felt like it was that tiny bit hotter, and that was quite telling in that I spent the whole of lap 2 on Monday night trying to chase the rear wheel of the group, and then this evening's race was just that tiny little bit easier to kind of maybe sit on the group for a little bit longer coming into the second lap. I didn't feel like I was constantly being dropped. I mean, I was close to it, guys. I'm off the back wheel quite a lot of it and just trying to hold on, but it didn't have that same effect. I do, obviously, having raced this on Monday, I am very aware of when and how I should be using my power-ups. And then here I go. I think there might be a chance that I've got my eyes closed whilst doing this hill, because I don't quite need to work that hard. I think maybe if I'd been a bit smoother with it, because you can tell what my problem is that I'm getting to the top and I'm just so ballsed at the top that I can't then cycle off the top and maintain reasonable wattage on the descent, which is when people start moving away. So you see that my watts go from, reasonable 500 plus watts on the climb. Then I come through the back side of the climb, we come down to the descent, and I kind of struggle a little bit to kind of hold any decent wattage. I'm just like willing myself to carry on. But we do pick up a nice little group coming through, and I always keep half an eye on the mini map in these positions, and it kind of looked like I was kind of getting towards the back, but there was a little group, and I thought, right, these guys, I'm going to attach to these guys. And then you can always tell that there's a couple of guys, and guys, my hat is off to you completely, who are doing the dog work to get our little group back to the front group. So you guys are the heroes. I am literally just the guy that is unapologetically just sucking your wheels as we get taken back to the front group. So if that was anyone, guys, I appreciate you. Thank you. You are kind of the reason that I managed to kind of make these bridges. But that is a bit of a bridge or die situation, and that's obviously what the guys see, or the guys and girls see, and then they take it upon themselves to do that work. So it's interesting because, like, I would never have the strength to kind of, for that particular bridge, like doing that climb and then coming in the descent for the recovery, I wouldn't have had the strength to ride into that bridge. But because other guys realize the situation, then all I have to do is try and sit with those guys and try and use them as a bit of a drag to come back to the main group. But the nice thing is when we get back to the main group, there's about 31 or 34 of us this time. So on Monday night's race, at this point, I think there was still about 50 people in the front group. There are slightly less numbers in tonight's race. We started with about 85 riders in the pen, whereas Mondays we had maybe 110, just over 105. So there are a few less in the group, but still, the percentage-wise, it feels like we've dropped off a few more on tonight's race, and there are about 34 riders. Sorry, I realised I've covered the part of the screen that gives you that kind of detail on how many riders are in the main group. But I'll try and just drop that little box down so you can see that. So holding the group wasn't the worst thing in the world coming into tonight's race. I was definitely struggling, like, hands up. The guys that are riding off the front, it's a really bold move, but you have to be, I don't know, how do you get to that point where effectively, because someone actually left a comment and said that they rode this effectively as an FTP test, and they just went out at 4.2 watts and tried to hold that for as long as possible, and just managed to ride this race just like super aggressively off the front. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I guess if you are looking for that kind of, in inverted commas, FTP test type ride, you could do something like that. These slightly shorter, just under 10-mile races, 15k, you could probably just ride it as a TT if you felt like you were super strong. But again, I guess it's what you want out of the session or out of your evening. And you can see that Monday nights, we're already kind of crossing the bridge, whereas tonight, so we're not hugely behind, but we are definitely kind of just a few seconds off the pace from what the guys at the front were pushing on Monday. And that's kind of like, you can see me Monday night super struggling to stay with the group, kind of completely off the back, whereas tonight's, it was that little bit more comfortable. And I think, just maybe because I was trying to be a bit more even with it. Saying that, you can obviously see that I am, I'm not like nestled nicely in the group. I am just positioned slightly further back. Whew. So it was hard. I find these shorter races probably don't play to my strengths right now, which is, they are punchy, they are slightly, or they are very aggressive. If it had been that little bit longer, then perhaps I have half a chance of making and holding front group until the finish line. But we are getting there. I'm not expecting miracles. So I'm not expecting to, not do it on Monday night and suddenly Thursday night be an infinitely better cyclist and be able to kind of crush a race. I'm, small little increments, take all the little positives I can and just try and kind of move forward. But some of the tips that are provided in the comments, guys, I really appreciate it. I'm starting to trying to kind of make sure that my cycling is a bit more even, or like those kind of watt spikes and the pressure spikes, trying to kind of like flatten those out a little bit. I think that's going to make a huge difference. I'm still not great when it comes to these little punchy climbs, right? So for me, it's just like kind of go, when in actual fact, I feel like I should be a bit more measured on it and trying to hold a certain wattage. I don't have the luxury of being able to ride to the front of the group, especially because this climb is so close to the finish. You get the feeling that people start making their move on this climb. That's what makes it particularly hard, because people are now making their move now, or it feels like that, right? It feels like, okay, if I'm strong and I'm really good on the climb, then I can move to the front. And you can see that on the mini map, is that a few guys have moved off the front, or at least one guy or a couple of guys have moved off the front to position themselves before they even get down back into the town. So I think there's like 4 of them up front before they even. So that's what makes this last climb so difficult, is because it's not ridden like a climb, it's ridden like a finish line separator. So people that ride that climb incredibly well are probably going to kind of position themselves, recover for the descent, and then try and hit the finish line. And that's not what I was able to do. I was struggling to hold it when it was just a normal climb, just kind of cycled slightly aggressively. It feels like, it only takes 4 or 5 people, as we see, to start pushing the watts. Then the rest of the group have to react to that. So this is a bit of a extenuating circumstance when it comes to a climb. But then position-wise, I think I'm 31st here, and which is quite nice. Like, I think that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that out of 80 odd people. And then my immediate attention turns to the mini map. There is one guy behind me, and I feel like I'm keeping him comfortably behind me. Then it looks like there's a small chase group behind him that are just throwing it down, and I'm like coming down the hill here, and I'm like, do you know what, 31st is good. That'd be awesome. And then I see this little chase group coming through, and I'm like, oh god, this is not going to be one way you can just kind of roll it through to the finish. I knew that I was going to have to work. I also knew that they were catching me. This group of like what looked like 4 or 5 people, they were definitely catching me. So I put a little kick in when I feel like they're kind of coming up close. And that's the kind of moment when I realised that I probably am not going to be able to weather this storm, and these guys are just going to blitz past, and there goes one, here comes the rest. So this little group of 4 riders kind of come through, and they come through really quickly, and that's super important. I think the speed at which they came through makes a difference to me, because I just couldn't hold on to that. Like, I even tried to spin up a little bit in anticipation of them coming through, and I knew they were coming quickly, so I just couldn't hold on to a wheel and then try and kick. So that's a good tip from anyone. That was great. That's it, guys. You can just see how we finish up this evening. There we go. I will see you guys hopefully next week for another race.